What did the Witkoff, Ushakov, and Ushakov Dmitriev transcripts reveal about US-Russian negotiations? We'll talk about this with Jason Smart, American political strategist. Jason, glad to see you, and thank you for joining us.
It's great to see you as well.
Jason, on November 25th, Bloomberg published an explosive report containing transcripts of two phone calls on between top Kremlin advisor Sir Yuri Ushakov and Kirill Dmitriev, and another between Ushakov and US presidential special envoy Steve Witkoff. The leak revealed that Witkoff coached Ushakov on how to communicate with Trump, while Dmitriev provided Washington with a list of Russia's conditions for initiating a peace element with Ukraine. What did we learn from the transcripts, and who could have leaked them, in your opinion?
Well, I think the reality of the fact is that one, they were leaked by Russia in order to derail any sort of peace negotiations. And the reason is very simple, is that there's a lot of people in Russia that are benefiting greatly from this war, specifically those that come from things like the intelligence services, like the FSB, which have been able to centralize a lot of control of the country's economy recently. And this war has put a lot of money into their pockets. So though it's not in Russia's strategic interest to continue this war, and it doesn't have the economic capacity to do so, they're willing to drive their country completely into the dirt if it will allow them to continue making money. And so they're doing things like releasing this. You remember there was also recently the article that came out where even Witkoff believed it was Dmitriev who had spoken to the press to relay what was going on in the negotiations. The Russians are routinely essentially mocking Witkoff because he believes that he's somehow trying to help them make a deal, and they turn around and leak whatever he does to the press. So it's very clear that they don't take him seriously. They think that he's a fool. And more than that, though, it's worse is that he is trying to make a deal work for the side of the Russians. But due to the Russians working against him, it's not working out.
Jason, yes, President Donald Trump commented on the recording of a conversation between Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Russian dictator's aide Yuri Ushakov, describing such discussions as standard practice. What is your view on President Trump describing the conversation between Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Russian aide Yuri Ushakov as standard practice?
I'm not surprised. I mean, he's dismissive of it because it would not be beneficial for him to say otherwise. So I wouldn't expect him to say it's problematic. He's, of course, going to just say that it's not a big deal. Of course, it's not normal. It's very not normal. But I'm very not surprised that the U.S. president takes that position.
The US proposed peace agreement project regarding Ukraine following a meeting of delegations from the US, Ukraine, and European allies was revised from 28 to 19 points. Um, As we see, the US peace plan for Ukraine has reached an impasse. How do you assess the significance of reducing the US proposed peace plan for Ukraine from 28 to 19 points? And what do you think about this?
Well, I think the reality is the most important points are the points that there's no agreement on. And that's why it's unlikely that anything's going to happen. Right now, it's very clear that Russia is not serious about negotiations. They're not serious about peace. And it's unlikely that anything will come of this. Let's remember that Russia all the time is asking for things that are just simply absurd. For instance, the rest of the territory of Donbass. Now, let's just calculate this. That's some of the most best defended territory in all of the country, certainly in Donbass. And that area that's not occupied yet, for Russia to take that at its current loss rate, which is about 170 to 180 soldiers per square kilometer, it means that Russia would have to lose another 1.25 million to 2 million soldiers to take just that area that's not occupied in Donbass. Russia doesn't have the capacity to do that, not militarily, not economically, not politically. And that's why to just give into it is absurd. Russia knows that cannot be achieved by their own merits, by their own military. And the only way it can hope to take those regions is if the U.S. pressures Ukraine, because on their own, the Russians have no capacity to do so.
Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov has said the Russian Federation has no intention of making concessions in its war against Ukraine, even as it has expressed support for the peace efforts of US President Donald Trump. What's next?
I think nothing will happen. I think these talks will break down as they usually do. I think that typically what we're going to see is that Russia is going to continue. Remember, it's been an estimate of the U.S. government's intelligence services going back now. Every year it's been repeated. Vladimir Putin's intentions in this war have not changed. His objectives have remained exactly the same as they were before. They are still seeking to take Kiev. They are still seeking to install a puppet government. That has not changed. So the fact that we're talking about these sorts of little details and modalities is a distraction from the fact that this murderous regime has every intention of continuing with the crimes in which it is perpetuating. And that's why today it's, I think, not only not going to happen, that there will not be a peace deal, but in fact, it'll probably get worse because we are entertaining this. It's better that we just close it down from the beginning and tell the Russians clearly that there is no deal to be made.
The New York Times writes that the United States warned Europe about Russian missiles while promoting its peace plan. American negotiator Daniel Driscoll cautioned European diplomats that Russia is rapidly ramping up missile production and building large stockpiles capable of influencing the course of the war and Europe's security. Could these arguments potentially have been used to encourage support for the American peace plan and speed up its approval?
Well, I think it's possible, but as I said, I think the reality of the matter is at this point, there is no consensus from either side, the Ukrainian side, nor from the Russian side, as to what is really necessary for peace. The Russians, even if they were given all of these things, would leave Ukraine not only totally vulnerable for the future, but it would be sort of absurd for Ukraine. It would be gross negligence on behalf of the government to say that we agreed to have almost no military, that we're not going to be a member of NATO, and we have no ability to defend ourselves in the future, and we're just going to trust Russia's good word. That's simply unacceptable. And it's something that is totally unrealistic that Ukraine will agree to. And I think the Western European countries, fortunately, appreciate that better than perhaps the US administration does at this point. But going ahead, I think this war will only really come to an end when Vladimir Putin himself feels that he is challenged and his own control over his throne in the Kremlin is being challenged. Up until that point, I don't think he really cares what this means in the loss of Russian soldiers' lives or what it means for the fortune of normal Russians. I think he's only concerned with his own well being, like every other dictator before him in history.
Jason, what can you say about American negotiator Daniel Driscoll?
I think that he's got an assignment from the president, which is to go find a deal, no matter how it's possible. It doesn't matter if it's a good deal. That's the important thing here. Look at the deal that they just had in Israel. Still, every single day, there's things blowing up in Gaza. It's very violent still. There's still explosions you can hear in downtown Tel Aviv. And that's because there's an ongoing war. Yes, there's been a deal. They will call it peace if they want to call it peace, but it hasn't actually achieved anything. It's the same thing here. There's not really an interest in peace in the word as we would understand that noun to be where there's not war, there's an absence of violence. I think what they are seeking to achieve is a document that's signed, which then would allow Donald Trump to claim that he ended the war in Ukraine, which is his primary objective.
Yes, President Donald Trump has said that a meeting between his special envoy Steve Witkoff and Russian dictator Vladimir Putin is planned for next week in Moscow, reported by Trump speaking to journalists aboard Air Force One. Quote, Steve Witkoff is going over to Russia, maybe with Jared Kushner. I'm not sure about Jared going, but he is involved in the process of resolving the war in Ukraine. A smart guy, and they're gonna be meeting with Putin, I believe, next week in Moscow. What, in general terms, can be the role of Jared Kushner in international peace negotiations, and how might the involvement of political figure with previous experience in East peace, as you said, the force influence perceptions of negotiations process?
I think it's probably on behalf of Donald Trump, his efforts to show that he's taking this seriously and he's doing his best efforts to end the war. He sends people that he trusts. Whether or not it's a good thing or bad thing is a different question, but he does send people like Witkoff, who has absolutely no experience in what he's doing and has been shown to make very amateur mistakes that sort of shock everybody. But either way, he trusts him and he has the right to choose him if he wants to. So he does. So if he wants to choose also his son in law, it would be on par for the course for Donald Trump. But it is probably not reflective of the fact that he has a very deep understanding of the region or of the crisis that is existent. For that matter, how to resolve it is something that is probably outside of their depth. But if that's who the president wishes to send, and by law, of course, he can send whoever he wishes to.
Yes, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has informed European allies that the United States wants to conclude a peace agreement before agreeing to any security guarantees for Ukraine. This was reported by European diplomat and another person familiar with the negotiations. According to Politico, how might the U.S. prioritization of a peace agreement before security guarantees affect Ukrainians' negotiating position? What are the potential risks for Ukraine if security guarantees are delayed until after a peace agreement is reached?
Yeah, Ukraine should absolutely not accept that deal. That would be just a horrible deal. Because the fact is, any sort of any contract in this world, a very basic part of contract law, is that there has to be sanction. That is, what happens if somebody violates the contract or violates the agreement and doesn't fulfill the terms of the agreement. And in this case, Russia has a very clear tendency of not taking the agreements that they sign seriously and routinely going against their own word. And as such, to just say, we'll give you a pass, we'll trust you this time, unlike the dozens of other times where you violated international agreements, would just be foolhardy. So I think that it really doesn't work out well for anybody at all if there is some sort of signed agreement without first having come to the conclusion as to what will be done to make sure that it can be enforced.
Uh, which security guarantees will be the best for Ukraine, in your opinion?
Well, long term, it's NATO membership, of course. But in the short term, given the fact that it's unrealistic, I think it's much more prone, if we were to go for the countries that are the major countries in NATO, to be part of this contingency. That would be, of course, the US, UK, etc. And why that's so important? Because if they sign on, that's really the greatest force of NATO. I mean, they are the ones that really have a lot of determining value as to what happens future for Ukraine. But also, if they were to position troops within Ukraine, that would be something that would certainly make the country more safe, because Russia would be less likely to attack a location, a military base, for instance, if it was mixed with foreign troops, because that could spark into a crisis that's far greater than just Ukraine.
Foreign troops, is this real?
I think it's something that Ukraine should seek after.
Mhm. Jason, and given its allies have managed to mount a credible resistance to the US-Russia peace plan, but without swift and coordinated action going forward, particularly regarding the transfer of 140 billion euros in frozen Russian assets, the pressure on Ukraine may once again intensify. The economist writes, the core problem is that in this war of attrition, Ukraine lacks both manpower and weapons. Russia is producing more drones and is capable of penetrating its air defenses. Europe, whose economy is 10 times the size of Russia's, could help resolve this problem by providing the necessary funding. Its leaders understand the threat, yet they seem unable to turn words into action. In general terms, what role could the transfer of frozen Russian assets play in supporting Ukrainians' military efforts?
It's probably the single best way that Ukraine could then afford to do what it needs. And let's be realistic about it, is that it's just a political decision. There's no reason for it not to happen. It's happened before historically. We know that. It's happened before in the United States with foreign assets from foreign countries a couple of times. So it's not something that's unheard of. It's just a political decision. Unfortunately, a lot of European leaders worry that, let's imagine we give this money to Ukraine, and 10 years from now, 20 years from now, a judge rules that that was illegal, that they did not have the right to do that, in which case those countries would have legal liability to then pay back those debts, plus the interest and the damage, etc. So for those countries, it could bankrupt them if they were to give Ukraine this money and it turns out they did not have the legal authorization to do so. The United States is actually far easier. The legislation is existent. It was used in World War II. It's been used against Iran. It's been used, as I said before, a couple times. So it's actually much easier to get the money from the United States. But either way, I think there is currently a fire, so we shouldn't be discussing as much about, how about if somebody else might need that hose in the future. Right now, we should just take the water where we can get it. At this point, right now, there's a lot of money sitting in the European Union that could very, very easily be used to support Ukraine, with the slight potential risk in the future at some point that it create problems. But for right now, there is an urgent fire that needs to be put out, and we found a source of water. It's that frozen money.
Uh, what else, if we're talking about not only frozen Russian assets?
Well, I think at this point, there's another thing that we have to look at, which is how it is that Ukraine, as a sustainable model, could continue to finance this war and other assets that it could be taking from around the world. Now, there is ongoing efforts right now to go after sanctioned individuals from Russia, to go after sanctioned activities by Russia. More assets that are frozen by that could also be going to Ukraine.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban plans to meet with Kremlin dictator Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Friday, November 28th. The meeting will take place against the backdrop of active negotiations between the United States and Ukraine on a new peace plan, while Orban openly accuses the European Union of seeking to prolong the war. This was reported by Euronews, citing Hungarian government sources. In your view, what challenges arise when individual EU member states pursue independent diplomatic initiatives? And what do you think about these initiatives?
It's Viktor Orban. It's not the first time he's done this before. But I think that it's just typical. He's playing a role that he has to play. Now, I think with Orban, though, specifically, I know everyone will jump and just say he's pro Russian, which I wouldn't disagree with. But I think that there's another aspect of this as well. he, like every other political leader in Europe, is doing what he thinks is what his population wants. I mean, ultimately, they're democratically elected, and all of foreign policy is really just an outgrowth of domestic demand. What's going to work for you electorally in your country? And in his case, he's facing a very difficult election upcoming. Fidesz has been in power for a number of years. That's his political party. It has historically done very well, but it's in decline, and today's popularity is in decline. So I think he's very desperate to find different ways to make himself relevant and to put the attention on himself again as the opposition in Hungary is obviously gaining force.
About secret plan for war with Russia, I see that the Wall Street Journal has revealed details of a secret plan developed by Germany in the event of war with Russia. As reported by the Wall Street Journal, the plan was drawn up by around a dozen senior German officers. Work on it began about 2.5 years ago. The 1,200 page document sets out in detail how 800,000 German, yes, and other NATO troops would be moved eastward to the front line. It maps the ports, rivers, railways, and roads they would use, as well as how they would be supplied and protected along the way. And German officials earlier said that they expect Russia to be ready and willing to attack NATO in 2029, but a series of incidents, sabotage attacks, and incursions into European airspace suggest it may be preparing to strike earlier. Analysts also believe that any possible ceasefire in Ukraine could free up time and resources for Russia to prepare for action against NATO members in Europe. And the authors of the plan believe that if they can strengthen Europe's resilience, they will not only be able to secure victory, but also reduce the likelihood of war. What do you think about war with Russia in Europe?
Well, I mean, if Russia would believe that it could win such a war, it'd be sort of insane. I don't think that Russia believes that it could win such a war. It's just obviously far beyond their depth. But either way, I think that it would be possible that they would do something like an attack within a Baltic state in order for a couple of different things to happen. First and foremost, it would then make most of the European countries stop sending assistance to Ukraine because they would start to use, for instance, the air defense that they currently send to Ukraine. They would stop sending it because they realize that they might have an immediate threat coming from Russia and they will need it on their own territory. Secondly, I think that a lot of assistance and a lot of tension that's going on in Ukraine would dissipate as the Europeans start to brace for themselves for what the future is, and that includes financially. So overall, I think it would be something that would be quite destabilizing for Ukraine's ongoing support from the West, and that's what Russia's real objective would be. I don't think that they have the intention of taking back, Lithuania or Estonia or Latvia, but I think that it's much more likely that they would do something to provoke a reaction, reflexive control, as the Soviets said, to provoke the reaction that is most apropos to what they wish to achieve.
Jason, thank you so much for the conversation and your insightful thoughts. Today we were joined by Jason Smart, American political strategist. I wish you all the best. Thank you for supporting Ukraine and see you.
Thank you. Have a good day.